All right, here we go with episode 96 of Return to Authenticity. And this week's guest, Shaban. This was a powerful talk. Man, I love these guests, man. Sherry tells this powerful story of she is an athletic beast. She's a certified fitness and life coach. She's an athletic therapist. She does all this great stuff in the athletic world. She's over 20 years coaching folks from beginners all the way to professional athletes in the fitness realm and helping people overcome self-limiting beliefs along the way. And of course, Sherry had her own challenge and trauma to overcome to get to that point, right? So when you look at her story, at the young age of 16, she's hit by a car and almost killed. She's almost paralyzed. And she has to overcome all those physical debilitation and just chaos that ensued after that wreck. A lot of misdiagnosis and poor diagnosis going on and poor therapies, and she overcomes that, right? And yet, even as an adult, even as a successful adult and business owner, she's having these limiting beliefs and questioning herself and questioning if she's up to being a physical trainer, given that she had all these kind of physical things that she had to overcome herself and we're still dealing with on a daily basis. And so she found herself slipping into this victim mentality that we often can find ourselves falling into. And also the imposter syndrome shows up where she thinks, am I worthy? Am I able to coach others, given who am I to be able to do these things, right? So she has to overcome that. And she just tells this really powerful story that I think we can all grab components of and associate or adopt for our lives, right? So she just tells this great story of overcoming such tremendous odds and then continuing to get pulled down and yet continuing to overcome. A great, great conversation. And I think you're really going to love this week's episode 96, and Sherry Shaban. Welcome to the Return to Authenticity podcast, where we hear inspiring and courageous stories of people who made bold pivots in their lives toward their more authentic selves, that version of themselves they were born to be or they had to find after life threw them a major curveball. I'm your host, Eric Sardina. Welcome and stand by. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today's guest is Sherry Shaban. Sherry is a Montreal, Canada-based certified fitness and life coach, a certified athletic therapist, and an osteopath, and the director of fitness for Rock Thomas's M1 Mastermind, with over 20 years in her specialty, coaching beginners to professional athletes and helping them overcome their unique obstacle to become the person they were meant to be. Sherry's own obstacle began at the young age of 16 when she was hit by a car, and the outcome of that accident nearly left her paralyzed. She underwent her first back surgery 1 month before her 17th birthday. The second surgery came in 2012 at a time when Sherry was just opening her first CrossFit gym in Montreal. She was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, where she discovered she was just 2 millimeters away from paralysis. For the first few years of being a gym owner, Sherry felt like a phony. She was frustrated with herself, disappointed and angry for being a victim of her circumstances, unable to demonstrate a single squat. But her turning point towards recovery came from understanding that one of the central elements to transformation is to let go of debilitating and self-limiting thoughts and to begin to rewrite a new story. I'm excited to have Sherry on the show today to share how she has overcome physical trauma and self-doubt to become the person she was meant to be, and how she's made it her life mission to help others do the same. And with that, Sherry Shaban, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Eric. So happy to be here today.
It's great having you here. Welcome from, you're in Montreal, Canada still, yes?
I am, yes. It's quite cold here. We've been getting a lot of snow.
I think we got some. So I'm in Texas, and we got hit with our little version of winter yesterday and woke up to about 2 inches of snow, and everybody's very excited by that sight of a little bit of snow on the ground, and temperatures in Fahrenheit of about 11 degrees this morning when we woke up. So I think that's minus something, 7 maybe, or something like that, Celsius.
Yeah.
Chilly, yeah. And by the weekend, it will be back to 55, I think, Fahrenheit. So I think that's what, 15 or 10 or something Celsius. I always love the conversion. I never can figure it out, but
I can never, I guess I get pretty close, but this whole concept around global warming, I think that's a true thing. I'm feeling, especially the last 5 years, there's been a lot of shifts in the climate.
you think
So,
so?
yeah.
It's going up and down. I know we've had some really cold winters the last couple. We had some like bizarre, like we had 4 or 5 days of not hitting freezing, not reaching freezing, not reaching 32 Fahrenheit. Um, in like 2 years ago. And yeah, it was record setting. So I don't know. We're getting a lot of cold down here. I don't know if that's something, but
It's interesting because it's actually the opposite for us. We're getting a lot of warm. So
mm,
I remember 10 years ago, it was much colder during this time. In fact, we'd always have snow before Christmas. And this was the one year where we did not have any snow, like for weeks until I think mid-January, we got our first big snowstorm. So there's a lot going on here.
it's
And
changing, always changing, right? Yes, for sure.
like life.
Um, so let's talk about what it was like to grow up. Did you grow up in Montreal? Talk about kind of childhood life growing up.
Oh goodness. I don't know that I've actually ever shared this publicly. So this is probably the first time I've ever been asked, but I grew up kind of in a weird environment, I would say. Let's call it not really your standard environment. Both my parents are physicians and well, were physicians when they were working, and they actually moved overseas to Saudi Arabia when I was just 2 years old. And so they worked for this oil company called Aramco. It was the
Mm,
largest American oil company in the world. I think now it's owned by the Saudis. But
Saudi
I
Aramco.
grew up in an environment. It was interesting. It was a little utopia, and it was American schooling, so I had American teachers, and I learned American history growing up, up until I was 15 years old, which is when then normally you would go to boarding school because schools only went up until ninth grade, and so it was different. We moved a lot as kids, and there was always a lot of international students around me. So different cultures, different ethnicities, that was always a normal thing. Different religious backgrounds, that was always a normal thing. So I got a great taste of just this beautiful global international environment growing up that I think many of us can relate to now that we have the internet and we're able to travel and we're able to connect with more people from different areas of the world.
That's wild. So do you have any memory of growing up in Canada before you went? So if you went, you said you were two when your parents
Yeah.
went. So you have no memory really, childhood memory of Canada.
Not so much, no, not
Yeah.
so much.
And when did you return to Canada from the Middle East?
Well, I left when I was 15. That's when I went to boarding school. I went to high school in Europe actually, and
Okay.
then after that I moved back to Montreal. And so at that point I was closer to 19, 20 years old when I moved back to Canada. And I never intended to stay, Eric, which is super interesting. I actually was wanting to go to New York because all my friends were in New York, but then
Yeah.
I ended up staying and then starting
Wow.
a life here. So yeah, it's weird how life just brings you where you're supposed to be.
It's interesting, right? Because that's a very obviously kind of quote unquote worldly upbringing, right? So you grew up in another country in the Middle East, very different from maybe a lot of the listeners to the program, and then go to school in Europe and have all the experiences of what growing up in Europe. I would assume that you got to travel around Europe quite a bit. Countries are
Mhm.
very close together. So being in Texas, right, I've got to drive 6, 7 hours just to leave the state.
Right.
And I think in Europe, you can cover multiple countries with that kind of driving. So you probably
Yeah.
saw a lot of countries. And then to end up coming back and going to Canada, which is going to be a small, I think there's what, 2 million people in all of Canada. And it's as
Yeah.
big as it's bigger than the United States or something. So the density is not quite the same as what you would have had as a kid, right? As a teenager in Europe growing up. Do you remember kind of what drew you to go to Montreal? Montreal is a very European city. I've been there a couple of times, but it's a beautiful city. But do you remember what drew you there?
I think it was the schooling at that time. I think, I wanted to come to McGill University. I ended up actually going to Concordia University. So it was probably the schooling that brought me here. And, again, I didn't have that intention to stay. And I think I stayed because it was very familiar, just the different ethnicities, the different cultural backgrounds. And I like that. I like just feeling exposed to and fully accepting of different peoples and really seeing how we're all exactly the same. So I think there's something about that energy of just this beautiful union that we create in humanity that just drew me to wanting to stay here. And then I started a gym and then started my career, and then that just kind of got me a little bit more permanently rooted in Montreal.
Yeah, yeah. Did your parents stay in Saudi Arabia, or did they move again?
They stayed a little bit longer, so I think they ended up retiring and then coming back to Canada when I had my first child. So this was, I mean, they officially moved back. It was around 2009, but yeah, they ended up staying just a little bit longer.
Okay, gotcha. Um, I'm curious. So when you went to boarding school in Europe, what was that like? What was your boarding school kind of environment like? Were you a sporty kid? Did you feel like you fit in? Did you enjoy school? Were your plans to go on to more schooling? You talked about Concordia and some colleges that you were drawn to in Canada. Talk a bit about that, kind of that upbringing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I went to a school called TASIS, so the American School in Switzerland. This is in Lugano, Switzerland, and it's interesting because I had no idea really what that environment was like. I was only 15 going to boarding school, but you go in there and you're going to school with princes from Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, and a lot of diplomat children, and so
Mm,
you're in this interesting environment. And of course, my parents, I grew up with both parents being physicians, so you're already kind of growing up with access to anything you possibly want. But then you go to this school, and now your friends and your classmates are all in Armani and Versace and
mm,
driving Porsches, because in Europe you can own one at 16 years old. So it
right.
was just a very different environment. It just really kind of opened up my eyes to just a different perspective really on life, and just growing up in a very different environment. And of course in Europe, the feeling was freedom, because I'm 15, I'm in boarding school, I'm on my own. And in Europe, you can go to bars at that age, you can smoke cigarettes, it's very free and very open. It's not like Canada or the US where we have
Mm,
certain age limits to doing certain things.
yep.
But again, it just opened up my eyes to more of acceptance of really other people and cultures and backgrounds.
Very interesting. Did you have any siblings that were with you at the time, or were you truly like by yourself on your own?
So my brother is a year older than me, and so he was a grade older than me. My sister was 2 years younger than me, so I kind of always had one of my siblings with me. I was in boarding school at Tassus for 3 years.
Mm,
So when I first got there, my brother was in 11th grade, and then by the time he graduated, I was a senior. I was in 12th grade, and then my sister joined as a sophomore, as a 10th grader. So I always had someone with me. However, you're still very independent. You're responsible to be in certain places at certain times. You're responsible for your
yeah.
homework. You're responsible for studying for your own exams. And of course, now that I had my freedom, I went from being an A+ student in ninth grade to now favoring other things. There were other priorities, Eric. So I'd have to say the first year or so of boarding school, I didn't take it super seriously academically. But then by the time I realized, oh my goodness, I need to get into a proper college, that's when I started to really buckle down and get back into studying, and get more serious about academics in general.
Yeah, I mean, I have to believe there's a million distractions when you're a teenager in Switzerland amongst the wealthiest of wealthy people, and no one overseeing you asking if you've done your homework or your vocabulary or what other aspect of have you done your math equations, right? And you're thinking,
Right.
I think I'm going out tonight, right? I don't think I'm going to worry about
Absolutely.
that.
Oh
So
yeah.
good on you for being able to get into school at all after that, right? So it's
Right.
yeah.
Thank you.
So you have this car accident that happens in the middle of this, yeah? So you were 16, so you would have been somewhere around maybe 10th grade or so, is that right? Or
Yeah, I was in
16 also?
11th grade at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, talk a bit about that. What happened there and what was the situation?
So this was my junior year of high school. I went downtown to buy Pearl Jam tickets with my roommate, and we were running to catch the bus. We had just actually gone to get our tickets, and then we went to Innovazione, which was this big supermarket. We got honey, and I remember the honey because I just remember my hair being covered in honey and pieces of glass because the jar had broken. So we got some snacks for our dorm room. And then we were going to catch the bus to come back. And of course, when you're in boarding school, you have to check in at the right time. You have to be on time. And so we're rushing back to catch the bus to go back on campus. And I rushed across the street. I didn't see the car coming, and I was struck by the car. And the next memory that I had, I actually woke up in the hospital, and I didn't realize what had happened until, of course, my roommate, she's with me. She's freaking out, and she explains to me that I was hit by a car. And it's interesting because after that whole entire situation, my back became the issue. But what was never addressed at that time was the fact that I had a concussion and I blacked out. Because back then we didn't talk about concussions and we didn't talk about head injuries. We only spoke about what was actually tangible and what was available in terms of an emergency situation. And so later on, when I came back to basketball practice, that's actually when I started to feel the pain going down my leg. I had sciatica, and it was just getting progressively worse every single day until it got to the point where I wasn't able to walk uphill. I wasn't able to shower on my own. I wasn't able to stand for a long amount of time. I wasn't even able to sit as I am seated today for more than 10, 15 minutes at a time without being in excruciating pain. And so at that point, I had actually left Switzerland. I came back home to Saudi Arabia at that time where my parents were, and that's when I had my first back surgery after I found out that I'd herniated multiple discs in my back. And then essentially the rest was history. I was asked never to play sports again. I was removed from any sort of group or varsity sport that I was involved in at the time, which was really a massive blow for me. Is one bitter pill to swallow because I was a varsity athlete. I placed first place. I was always MVP. And now here I was asked to never play sports again. And so after that first back surgery, I listened for a long time. Doctors knew the right thing. You had to listen to what the doctor said. They knew everything. And so I actually followed that advice for many years, only to find myself getting more and more in pain in my back and being able to do less and less things. In fact, my whole world was revolved around my back pain. The amount of time I spent at a party, where I went, the type of car that I sat in, all of that had to do with what was gonna help me manage my back pain. So if I would go to a social outing, I would always ask if there was a place for me to lie down, because I knew after 30 minutes I'd have to find a place to lie down. And so that's sort of how my life was for a while. And of course, to fit in, since I was no longer a jock, I was no longer hanging out with the athletes, I now started hanging out with a different crowd. So now I was starting to party, I was starting to do all those things that parents tell us not to do growing up. And I just went down that path for a few years until my early 20s, when just woke up one day with this massive epiphany of how this is not me. Nothing that I'm doing is aligning with the vision of my life. I always saw myself as this athlete. I always saw myself as this person who is also supposed to teach people. I just knew that I had this gift of teaching in me. And I just saw myself living this life that just was so not resonating with that vision of myself. And that was the point where I decided to sign up at a gym for the very first time and to just take on fitness. This was actually the first time in my life that I had not been involved in some sort of team sport or some sort of sport or activity in general. This was now me with my own accountability, showing up, really learning my body, learning movement, learning biomechanics, and learning how to navigate through just listening to the cues that my body was giving me. And eventually I was able to come off of pain medication. And it was at that point, Eric, where I decided to change career paths. I was studying biochemistry at the time, and I decided to go into exercise science and study everything I possibly could about the human body and injury rehabilitation.
Wow. So, a bunch of questions kind of come out for me there. One is, so when you got hit by the car, did you go up like over the windshield? Did it what was the kind of the way that it impacted you? So I picture you running across the street, car comes through the intersection, hits you. Does it kind of knock you up in the air? Do you know kind of what happens there? And then You hit your head apparently, obviously somewhere along the way, either against the car, against the ground.
I feel like I hit my head against the ground because I had major abrasions on my face. I feel like I scraped something. I don't exactly recall what happened, but what my roommate told me was that I was actually lodged from where the car hit me all the way onto the sidewalk on the other
Mm.
side. So I think that was the impact. However, I don't have memory of exactly what happened at that moment. My first memory was waking up in the hospital.
Were you actually unconscious or you just don't have memory of it? Or were you conscious but don't remember? Do you know? Like, you
I
remember
think
what
I
your
was
roommate said?
unconscious.
Okay.
I think I was unconscious because I remember waking up.
Yeah.
Um, had could it have been memory loss? Possibly. And again, this is where now the importance of diagnosing concussions is so important because had this happened today, there would have been a lot more testing and diagnosis of even memory loss,
Yep.
um, right, compared to the way that they actually perceive concussions in the past.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. And so then you're back. So you've obviously you're in the hospital. They're examining you and you have a back injury. So yeah, but they didn't know that you had discs that were knocked out of alignment. And do they, when they send you home, is there like, okay, you need to have surgery or there's no talk about surgery. It's just pain meds and rehab and that's it.
Yeah, really great question actually. When they released me, they're like, "Okay, well, you'll just come back in a couple weeks." There was no back pain, there was no leg pain. It was only until I actually got back into basketball practice and over that span of the week of just getting back into it, I started to feel this pain in my right glute and the next day it was just a little bit more and it just was getting so much worse so quickly and all of a sudden it was now going down my leg. It was like shooting
Mm,
pain, so excruciating,
yeah.
and just every day getting progressively and progressively worse. And so I think at the time when the accident happened and they released me from the hospital that initial time, I don't think they had understood the extent of the damage. And I think again they were really focused on all the abrasions on my face and just what had happened. But all of the other stuff, all the pain and all of the back stuff really started to show up as soon as I had come back to basketball practice.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And so that description of like pain radiating down the legs, that's often like a disc injury, right? That's basically the jelly. It's in the center of the disc. It's kind of pressing out through the vertebrae, through the actual hard part of the disc, and causing that pain down the legs. Yeah, is that
Yeah. Yeah,
accurate? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And so then, do they? I know in the intro we talked about your first surgery was shortly before your 17th birthday. So was that a spinal fusion of some sort, or what was going on with that surgery?
I'm so grateful I never had a spinal fusion. I did have a
Mhm.
partial laminectomy though. So that's when they remove a piece of the lamina. So you have your transverse processes on your vertebra, you have your spinal processes, and then there's like a little piece of bone that is right in between the two. And so they had to remove that piece of bone so that it allowed more space for the disc.
Yeah.
And so I'm again grateful that it didn't turn into fusion, but of course there's still instability with any surgery that we have with any sort of procedure such as back surgery or any type
Yeah.
of surgery in general. There's always damage to the tissue at that level.
Yeah. I know I've known more than a few people to have back surgeries and they almost never go well, right? Because there's so much complexity in the back. There's so much going on with nerves and you've got muscle and so much very delicate areas that can then present as different sorts of pain. And it's often, oh, I've got back pain, so I'm gonna have the surgery and it's gonna make it better. And it almost, and again, my few handful of friend instances, it never does, right? And it's almost always results in a follow-on surgery that also typically doesn't make it all the way better. And I'm always this person that's they're recommending do everything you can physically before you let somebody open your back up and start fusing things or creating, um, appliances and or mechanical corrections to what's going on back there, whether it's losing weight, because often I've friends would say, oh, I've got this back pain and numbness, but they're 35, 40 pounds overweight, and it's like, man, you will help yourself so much if you'll just lose some weight, right? Or whatever, do some physical things first. it's just such a challenging thing. And then when I think about a young person, right, you're 16, almost 17 years old, your body's still growing, all these things still happening, to have a surgery like that had to be very, very challenging. Um, so talk, I guess, about the kind of post-surgery, what's happening, how are things in, because I know in part of your story, you talked about, you got away from athletics because it was like no more athletics, right? And you needed to lay down because you couldn't stand or sit for a long period of time. That's had to be really mentally challenging too for a young person, right? Thinking this is my lot in life, right? This is what I have now, right? And so talk a bit about that, kind of the post-operative, and then what was happening, and then leading up to you then starting to lean into fitness again, coming back to fitness.
Yeah. So while it's all happening, you're in the flow and you're so desperate because the pain is so bad and you're not really thinking about what's going to come after. You're just thinking about how can I get out of this pain as quickly as possible? How can I somehow get my life back? But then afterwards, when you realize, okay, now that my life is back, what is my life? Like who am I? I'm Sherry the athlete. That's how I've always known myself. Even growing up in elementary school, that's just how everybody always knew me. And I was always competing against the boys.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden now you realize there's this loss of identity. And that, I think, Eric, is the hardest and the scariest thing for all of us, is when suddenly we everything that we've thought we were is no longer there. And it happens so quickly. It happens in an instant. And so you always hear stories about people suddenly having a big accident or having a stroke or suddenly becoming debilitated in some way, where now their whole entire life has to change. And this is the hardest part to move from, because now it's reestablishing identity. It's really understanding, how do I fit in all of this? And more importantly, what do I like? Like, who am I? Because without sports now, who am I? What do I want to involve myself in? And because I think I was always kind of good in science and chemistry and things like that came natural to me, I just followed into that, not really thinking about whether or not I was actually passionate about it. And so again, because we have this high need for connection as humans, love and connection is one of our human needs. Of course, we were wanting to connect in some way. In the past, it used to be through sports and athleticism that I was connecting with others, and I was connecting with myself, and I was connecting with my highest self and what I was able to do. But now I had to find new and different challenging things. And so where I found connection was now in a social environment where I got significance, or I got a connection from others through influence. And
Mm.
some of that looked like partying, and some of that looked like, again, vices that normally were not aligned with who I was or who I saw
Mm.
myself as. So just just that feeling of loss, I would say, because there is that element of mourning that we actually have to go through, and we don't realize this. Once our identity is stripped from us, there is this part of us that has also passed on. And so now we're needing to reestablish maybe a new identity, a new way that we can see ourselves. And more importantly, how can we see ourselves as not being a victim of something that's happened? And how can we actually take a story and realize that we can write the story? We can write the
Mm.
ending of the story. In fact, we can continue to add to it in a way that aligns with us. And that in itself is incredibly empowering. And so there was definitely a phase where I felt very lost and disconnected with self. And that's actually what brought me back to the gym, was realizing I love activity. I love movement. I love physically challenging my body. How can I do that in a way that respects where I am right now, and then fall in love with it without it needing to look a certain way? And so removing competition from fitness was actually very hard for me, because I always competed. When I was
Mm.
younger, I competed in swimming. I competed in varsity, whatever, anything that I could possibly get involved in, I had to compete. And so being able to actually compete with myself and have me being my own opponent was the only way that I could actually continue to show up for myself in that way and get excited about it and get inspired about my journey. And so all this to say is, when we are in that place where we're needing to make a massive shift in our life because of circumstances that are outside of our control, the first and greatest thing that is lost is identity. And to find identity, really getting into that true self. Who am I really? And what actually lights me up? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What is that highest mission and version of myself that I'm meant to express in this lifetime? That's the hardest part to come back to. But also the moment we realize that we are not all these things. I'm not all the things that are outside of me. I'm not all the things that have happened in my life. I'm not a mom because I'm just a mom, and I'm not a coach or an athlete because I'm just an athlete. I'm actually something deeper than that, and I am self. I am, right? And we always talk about this in spirituality. Who are you? You are just who you are in this very moment without anything else outside yourself. And so for us to really empower ourselves, to get excited and re-inspired about life, it's really reconnecting with what is that greatest purpose and that greatest mission vision that we had in our lives, and really learning how that can actually look any way we want it to, if we know and believe that we can actually write our own story.
Yeah, and that what you just described there is so like that, connecting with a higher purpose and with your purpose, like your divine purpose, the reason you were kind of created, the reason you're put on the earth, right? What are we here to do? I think so many people are struggling with that, trying to figure that out. At least in my experience, that is true, right? That people grapple with that, especially when there's been an interruption in what they thought was their path, right? So for you, it might have been that injury that took you out of where you thought you were, and now you're kind of in this drifting moment of like, what does it mean if I don't have athletics, right? And I've seen people go through this when they've come through, a divorce or a death or a loss of a job or a career that they thought was going to be their thing, and it ended up not happening. It is the thing I think that as humans we grapple with. We want to be connected with that higher sense of purpose, right? Like there's got to be something more than the thing that I thought it was, or this thing that I'm kind of in this vacuum around right now, and trying to get my arms around it. So, all right. So what's interesting, so you're an athlete, super athletic. The injury takes you away from that. You go through this period of kind of trying to figure things out and losing your identity a bit, and then you come back to athletics. But it's different now, right? You're not in team sports. You're not competing. You're more sort of self-motivating, going to the gym. Was it CrossFit right away, or was it other forms of kind of exercise and or working out? You might be called working out, but what was it that you initially came back to?
I think we would call that bodybuilding,
Okay.
and it was, just your generic sort of, chest and triceps one day and back and biceps another day. And that's how it started. It was a beautiful reintroduction. In fact, I think there's so much to learn there, but it did end up becoming CrossFit because I think again it was that little competitive nature
Yeah.
that really drove me to CrossFit. And now when we talk about competition, of course it's self-competition, and that's also the beautiful thing about CrossFit is that you're always able to compete with yourself. You're able to compete with who you were yesterday and continue to improve upon that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and CrossFit has what year would this have been when you were starting to get involved with CrossFit, when it was actually starting to become like for you CrossFit?
This was probably in 2010,
Okay.
around,
And
yeah.
CrossFit really had, I think, had its initial in the States, which I think was kind of a Southern California thing, was where it started, if I'm not mistaken, maybe
Mhm.
in the early 2004, 5, 6-ish range. And
Yeah.
then I know I've got a lot of friends actually in Canada that are involved with CrossFit. And so it seems like I don't know if it just kind of expanded across, North America, or how it kind of got to Canada, or how quickly, but it would seem like that was sort of the early days of CrossFit that you were
Yes.
involved with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Even when I opened my first CrossFit gym, CrossFit Westmount, I was the third gym in Montreal to open, the third CrossFit gym. And then really within 3 years, there was like a gazillion gyms opening up every single year. So definitely it was something new that had come to Canada.
Yeah.
And then of course you start to see the influence of, other gyms and other training studios taking on a lot of the same values that CrossFit also shares and teaches people.
Yeah, I think CrossFit has a bit of a, I don't know, it's got this reputation that goes with it, right? People typically, when they hear the word CrossFit, they think they have an opinion, right? Good or bad, or love it or hate it, or something. And from my perspective, I'm athletic and I do a lot of working out, a lot of endurance sports, love to just exercise the body. My perspective on CrossFit is it's one of the more difficult things you can do. Like, so I was a triathlete earlier in my, maybe a decade or so ago. And I love the fact that it was very well rounded, right? So you always doing different things. And never felt, I think, in as good a shape as when I was competing at triathlon, just because you're so balanced. I've run, done a lot of distance running, but I feel like you can almost get sort of out of balance when you're a really fit distance runner. You're sort of out of balance almost by need, whereas triathlon, not so. And I think CrossFit also, it's very well rounded, right? So you're getting all sorts of things. You're getting some amount of cardio endurance by the virtue you're working at a very high heart rate for some period of time. You're working all sorts of muscle groups. And so really good. I think where the negative stigma comes in is that people just are like, they go off the deep end with competing and, or, you know, what's the watt of the day? And I'm just going to throw up in this trash can and I'm going to break my body into smithereens in order to kind of show that I'm worthy of this, CrossFit. And if I'm not, then I'm somehow less. And, and so it can kind of, I think, which maybe it's just human nature, right? To take things to an extreme, especially in athletic, endeavor, that people are competitive, and they're looking for ways to compete and show themselves on a scoreboard, right? Where do I stack up?
Right.
But what was your sort of experience with CrossFit in those early days? Do you find it was good, supportive? And maybe it's different from gym to gym, but did you find it was good, supportive environment for kind of what you were doing, getting back into athletics? Was it too addictive? Where would you align it, I guess?
Oh, so good. Well, I think sport in general is very addictive. It's interesting because you're a triathlete. By the way, I've done triathlon for a while, and I've done an Ironman, and almost the same mindset is present in
Yeah.
triathlon as it is in CrossFit, right? It's almost like this cult like showing up for this thing because there is connection, there is a community, there's a culture even around it. And so I'll say, just like any other sport, I truly believe that we get injured when our ego gets in the way. And my background, I'm an osteopath, I'm a certified athletic therapist, and I'll say I have treated more endurance athletes, especially in cycling and in running, than I
Yeah.
ever have treated CrossFit athletes. And it's exactly what you said, Eric. It's just very well rounded, and it always also depends on the gym. And I always used to say this to anybody who wanted to come do a free trial at my gym. They would ask me, well, why should I come to your gym, or why should I join your gym? And I would always say to them the same thing. Well, I don't want to convince you to join my gym. Actually, what you should do is try out my gym and try a few other gyms and then see which environment feels right for you, because there are certain environments that you go to where it is all about competition and pushing yourself really hard, and maybe even pushing yourself to that point of injury because that competition was so important.
Mm.
However, because of my background and because of my back issues, and just even my studies around osteopathy and athletic therapy, injury prevention was my number one mandate. I wanted everyone to come in, to train, to get fit, to get all the results that they wanted, and more importantly, to be able to do this every single day for the rest of their life. My goal is not just to be in my best shape in my 20s or my 30s because I'm injury free, and then basically set myself up to not be able to continue because I pushed my body too hard or abused my body in some ways. And so that was the culture that we had in our gym. If you were looking to compete at a very high level in CrossFit, my gym would not have been a match for you. So my gym was really geared to the moms that came in with, their car seats, and the people in their 50s and 60s, and the people who had MS who wanted to work with somebody who could hold space for them in that place. I had amputees at my gym. And so that's just the culture that I wanted to create in my gym, and essentially in all of my practice and my teachings. And so when I first joined CrossFit, it really was this intelligent way to train. And the reason why I say this is because, again, I had come from a background where I go to the gym for 2 hours. I'm going to do cardio for about an hour. It's either going to be on the bike or it's going to be on the treadmill. And then I'm going to do my weights, and I'm going to do that 5 days a week. But when I first got into a CrossFit gym and I tried my first workout, it was called Fran. I don't know if you're aware of what Fran is, but it's a 21, 15, 9 of thrusters and pull-ups. And I was like, that's the workout? Like, that's so dumb. Like, what do you mean? That's all you're going to do?
Right.
And then Eric, halfway in my 21 reps, I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
And so it is hard, but it is relatively hard. It's relatively challenging to the person. And although they say CrossFit is high intensity, again, it's relative to the person. And so what I loved about CrossFit is that it was a very complete sport. If you ever watch the CrossFit Games, you always see that they start with some sort of triathlon event anyways. There's a
Mm-hmm.
run, there's a bike, there's a combination of everything. And the idea of CrossFit is really to get you prepared for all the different type of areas of fitness, not just that one thing, like you said, not just to be really great at running, but you're going to be pretty good at a lot of different things and a very balanced athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I mean, because as you're describing your gym, you're really kind of describing it as an outpouring of you, right? So you're having to figure out how to use fitness and exercise in your new world around dealing with an injury that we're going to talk about in a second was still not gone, right? You obviously have another surgery that happens, but now you've got people coming to you that have some amount of a mental block that they have to overcome, right? I'm a person with MS, or I'm a mom, or I'm this, and I've got, I wasn't the person I used to be before I had kids, or I wasn't the person I, was before I had an injury. And your gym is really designed to help them through that new kind of discovery of who they are.
Mm.
Talk about, because I know mindset and mental visualization of who, and kind of reframing of you and your story becomes part of, kind of very much part of your story and who you are and how you kind of work with people. So talk a bit about that as you were putting your gym together, the importance of that mindset component and what you would see in people coming through those doors and then how they would transform.
Yeah. Well, when I first opened my gym,
Pardon the interruption, everyone. Do you ever feel like you're out of alignment with your true gifts, your passion, and your purpose for being on this earth? Do you feel like you're grinding it out each week with the appearance of success and still asking, is this it? If so, I get it. I've been right where you're at. And once I figured it out for myself, it's why I started coaching. Now I help my clients get back into alignment with their authentic self. I help them find meaning, purpose, joy, and energy in each day. Check out my website at ericsardina.com to learn more and to schedule a free 15-minute strategy session. And now, back to the show.
my mindset was not there myself, and I was very much a victim of everything that had happened. And as I was opening up that first gym that I was sharing with you, the third CrossFit gym in Montreal, I was on a deadline, Eric. I had to get things done. I had a lot of investment that I had made to get things done on time. And so I started to neglect my own signals that my body was giving me. My back was starting to hurt. I was starting to get shooting pain down my leg again, but I had a deadline. And so I went in every day and I carried the heavy boxes and I sanded the plyometric boxes and I painted the walls. And then the week actually that we were opening, I ended up collapsing on the floor after sanding a plyometric box. As soon as I was done, I stood up and I collapsed on the floor. And that was when I was rushed by ambulance to the hospital and had my second back surgery. And that's when I heard that I was 2 millimeters away from paralysis. And honestly, not surprised, because I knew it was coming. It was getting worse every single day. I'd been there before, but again, it's the ego. It's the ego that gets in the way. It's the same ego that gets in the way of us even just listening to our body and avoiding injury, whether we are a triathlete or whether we are a CrossFit athlete. And so when I had first opened up my gym, I had other coaches teaching all of my classes. I couldn't even stand for long enough to even teach one class, let alone demonstrate a squat. And so there was a very big part of me that felt not enough. I felt like a phony. I felt like I was fake. In fact, when I would go to parties or when I would go to social events and people would ask me what I did for a living, I didn't even want to tell them I owned a gym. I was too embarrassed to say that I owned a gym because I didn't feel like I matched a person who owned a gym. And so as I did start to observe people coming in, these are the moms that came in with a small baby and a car seat, and these are the office workers that have so much responsibility and they're making time for themselves. And I'm seeing these beautiful physical transformations. It dawned on me that I can also, just the way that I had once upon a time, walked into the gym, was able to overcome pain meds and then find this path into fitness, I could do it again. And so the way that that looked actually started first with yoga. And I needed to start with yoga first to get mobility. And as soon as I gained mobility, I started then working with body weight. And that was one of the hardest things that I had to accept, learning that I was not allowed to load my spine. I wasn't allowed to lift these heavy weights, which again, that's where you have to fight the ego. And so as I started seeing all of these people transform and really have these magical results just because of consistency, just because of determination, it really made me realize that we all have a story. And the more that you speak to somebody, the more you realize that we all have a story. We all have something that becomes challenging for us, something that we have to overcome. And so as you step back and you realize, wow, I would never actually go watch a movie where there was this hero that was so beautiful and amazing in the beginning and had all the money and had all the health that they wanted. And in the middle of the movie, they were also beautiful and rich and famous and everything really amazing going for them. And then at the end of the movie, still really amazing. There was absolutely no struggle. We don't go to watch those movies, right?
Right.
Because every single hero has to have a villain. And when you have a villain, that's where the hero can really shine, right? And the greater the hero, the greater the villain, right? Superman only ends up fighting with that biggest villain in the movie. That happens in every single superhero movie. And so once you realize this and you realize it's all a story, and we can either position ourselves in that story as the victim of everything that happens to us, whether that's a traumatic event in our childhood, whether that's physical or sexual or even mental, we realize that this had to have happened in order for us to really learn something from it, or to grow, or to expand, or to become who we are, to give us the resilience that we have today. And so as we start to empower ourselves, understanding that things didn't happen to us, they actually happened for us, that's where really we realize that this story can be written in any way. And when I started to share my story, Eric, that's when I actually started to impact people. It wasn't opening the gyms. It wasn't because I had a six pack. It wasn't because I was so fit that was inspiring. What was inspiring was people learning that I was near paralysis, people
Mhm.
learning that I've had two back surgeries, people learning that I had to come back and I had to build up from two babies and two back surgeries and constant injuries that happen. That's inspiring because that's relatable. And when that's relatable, there's a connection, and the connection is real, and the connection is possible. And that's what everybody wants to know. We go watch these movies because we want to know what happens in the end. And so when we can look at our entire life as a story that we can write, we can either decide we're going to be the victim of the things that happen to us and think that life is just happening to us all the time and we have no control to change over anything, then we're right. But if we realize that things happen for us and there's a greater purpose to all that, and what is it for? How can I actually impact people? Because I believe we're all here for that exact same purpose. We are all here to better mankind in some way. We're all here to help evolve each other and expand each other in some way. And so when we take our story and we can share with other people, use that as leverage to impact others in their healing journey or in their story of success, that's so exciting. That's so exciting. And no matter what happens, because life continues and life events keep coming up, things outside of our control. But when we realize that we can always reposition that story so that it's impactful, so that we remember that life happens for us, not to us, we really do become limitless.
Yeah, I love that. It's so well said. And you're really describing something that's near and dear to my heart, which is the hero's journey, right? So if you've read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho,
Every
right?
year, oh,
Yeah,
so good. I read that
phenomenal,
every
right? And
year.
it's how all good story is told is through the eyes of the hero. And there's that initial resistance to the call, and then finally accepting the call, stepping into darkness, into the unknown, and fighting those dragons and different, challenges along the way, needing a mentor, needing a guide to help you through, thinking it's all is lost, and then finding a way through, having to ultimately fight the big battle, and then bringing whatever that thing is that you found in the darkness back to the world to share with others. That is the hero's journey. And it is such a powerful one. And if we can see ourselves in that hero, it's so empowering because we recognize any shortfall, any roadblock is just part of that journey that ultimately we're destined to come through with enough perseverance, with finding what do we need, what tool, what guide, what mentor do we need to help us along that path to finding the thing that we need to bring back to the world, right? It's such a powerful story and
Gave me
framework.
goosebumps when you shared. I just have to say that's so impactful. Thank you so much for that.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I love it. And you're 2 millimeters. I have to go back to this 2 millimeters from paralysis. That is like, so you were close to having some impacting your spinal cord or something. And
Yeah.
so what did they do something to help you kind of overcome that? And then you mentioned needing yoga to create mobility again. And um, talk
Yeah.
more about
So
that.
I had gone into the hospital on Wednesday and then they kept me there until Friday. I actually was operated on Friday morning. And so it was it was a shock, of course, just to learn that you were that close and really one small move, or had I waited one more day, what
Mm.
what would the outcome have been? And so This was a central herniation. So the disc actually, instead of it herniating to the side, it herniated directly on the spinal cord itself. And so that would have resulted in me being in a wheelchair, of being incontinent for the rest of my life, to yeah, to really
Yeah.
having to rely on other people all the time. And every time I think about that, I'm so incredibly grateful. I'm so incredibly grateful. And that's what I always remember every single time I don't feel like working out or I don't feel like going for my
Mm.
run. We have nasty weather these days in Montreal. The question and what really comes up for me is like, Sherry, like, don't forget, you don't have to do this. You get to do this. Like
Yeah.
everything is a gift. It's always a gift. You never have to do anything, but you got to do this and you got to use your legs. And so it's so incredibly humbling to reconnect with that and to really grasp the truth of what is actually available.
Yeah. I love it. So inspiring, man. It's fantastic. And so, what comes out for me there, what sort of comes to mind is this idea that mind and body are so intertwined, right? So the power of the mind to kind of power the body forward, and the need for also, the mind to not overwhelm the body, right? So
Mhm.
like your mind, you were driving yourself so hard in the midst of really what was kind of physically potentially damaging. And I think as athletes, we all go through that at some level, right? We drive ourselves, we get accustomed to pushing through pain and difficult things and knowing I can push harder, I can push further, but at some point we potentially do damage, right? You have to there's that yin and yang of needing to know like when is too much, when is it, when, and how do I govern that and pull back. But certainly the mind and the fact that what you just said there, like Sherry, I can, you don't have to go run. I get to go run. The fact that you're running of all things, right? So people think, oh, I tend to tell you how many people I tell that I run and they're like, oh yeah, I wish I could run. I have bad knees. And it's just such a common thing people to say, I have bad knees. And I'm like, I don't really know if you'd have bad knees. I think maybe you're just either have the wrong shoes, you have the wrong mindset around what running can be. And you're not, and you're willing to sort of just write it off and not try. But the fact that you're able to, even with that, potentially again, paralyzing or debilitating injury, run, which people equate with very high impact, jarring on the spine, all these things is incredible. And I have to think is a testament to, mind as well as then taking all those steps necessary to make yourself physically able to do that thing again, right? And continue to grow. I know in part of the intro in our discussion too, you said you felt like you were a phony because you couldn't do a squat. Well, I know you can do a squat now, right? You've been able to increase and continue to increase your fitness, and you are very physically fit now. You're able to do a lot of things, so through time and through effort. And I would think you coach your clients in a similar way. I would anticipate, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eric, the body is so resilient. It's amazing. Like when you think about, oh, when I cut myself, how suddenly there's just this beautiful thing that happens. I don't even have to tell my body to do anything for me, but it just knows what to do and it heals itself. When we realize this and we just surrender to what's actually already there. Again, I keep saying the already there because us humans, we feel like we have to control everything. We're in charge of everything, and we're really not. We're really in charge of the reaction to things that
Mm.
already happen outside of us. And so when you allow your body, that person who, for example, was told you have bad knees, you shouldn't run, you have bad hips, you shouldn't run, you have a labrum tear, you shouldn't run, you have a bad back, you shouldn't run. If we actually connect with the messaging that our body gives us, that is the best clue to do anything. It is the best clue towards what we're supposed to eat, what we should be putting in our body, to how we're supposed to be moving. And so the moment that you connect with this higher intelligence, this intuitive capacity that we already have, you're going to know all the answers. And so since my back surgery, I've torn calf muscles, I've had knee issues, I've torn labrum in my shoulder. I mean, it's constant. This is part of sports, this is a part of athleticism. But there's always a way. And the
Yeah.
mind plays a very powerful component, but the other part that we oftentimes forget is that body's innate capacity to heal itself and that highest form of intelligence that's already there and available for us. Now, if you unite the two, you marry the two with that strong mindset and you surrender to what the body can do, again, you become limitless.
Yeah. I love it. So I got to nerd out on a few things that I know you have deep knowledge in. And so, but before we jump into some things around nutrition and intermittent fasting and some questions I've got there for you, talk a bit about, because I don't really have any knowledge of you said part of your professional background is you're director of fitness for Rock Thomas's M1 Mastermind. What exactly is that? And tell me a bit about what that mastermind is.
So this is a whole life fulfillionaire mastermind. I joined this actually in 2018. I was in a very interesting place in my life where I had a lot of ideas. I knew that I don't even want to say passion, I'm going to say the word obsessed. I was very obsessed around what I did and didn't have the social support to really be able to express that and expand that. And so I joined M1, which stands for March to Your Million, but it's not just about money. It's really about your being fulfilled in the different areas of your life. So we honor relationships, we honor life and adventure, we of course honor our career and finances and our families, and even contribution and giving back to the tribe itself, and also to greater good and a greater cause. And so being able to really be in that space helped me unleash all of the limiting beliefs. Oftentimes we are told what we can and cannot do. We are limited by what others have told us, what is possible for us. But being in that environment, really shedding all those limiting beliefs, all those blocks, has allowed me to really connect with that version of myself that allows me to create all the things. And so that's where I released all of those self-sabotaging thoughts that I couldn't do certain things. So I was able to have the courage to venture and be curious around all the little projects I had and the ideas and visions I had around some of the things I wanted to create. And so from being in that environment, I launched my own groups. I've created my own programs. I've launched my podcast and my YouTube channel. And so just continues to give you that space where you can connect with people who will always push you to be your highest version. Normally, when we are in our normal environment or our peer group, sometimes we notice we hold back. Maybe amazing things happen in our lives, but we don't oftentimes share because either people don't understand or they may not really be supportive of that. But being in this space, allowing yourself to just congratulate yourself for very small wins, to just be yourself in the way that you are without having to need to be anything more, again, was just that push. And so when I joined the group, this was in 2018, maybe a month or two in, I was already coaching and supporting. And so I help people in M1 focus on that particular garden, which is the health and fitness garden. And it's so incredibly fulfilling just to see people creating this balance around not just finances, but also their health and their relationships and fun and adventure.
Love it. Fantastic. All right. So let's talk about a couple of health and nutrition type of things, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Talk about your nutrition philosophy, kind of because there's so many different programs out there, keto and vegan and paleo. And I'm really, I don't want to bias you. So tell me a bit about what your sort of philosophy is around nutrition, what your thoughts are there.
Had we had this conversation maybe 5 years ago, I would have probably told you something like paleo is the way to go, or being vegan is the way to go, because I did all those things. And so what I noticed, and especially when I got into the health and fitness space in my early 20s, when I first started to get into the gym, is that there are so many diets out there, as we all know. Every single diet is backed by science, as we also know. Every single person also thinks that that's the right way to eat. So no matter what source you're going to read or you're going to look up, you're going to get really confused, because we should not be eating grains. But then here it says we should only be eating whole grains. And then here it says we should not be eating fats. And then here it says, yeah, we actually should be eating a very high fat diet. And so there's all of this confusing information. And if you actually take a step back and you look at anybody who's been on a weight loss journey for the majority of their lives, not only can they write a bazillion diet books, but they're also more overweight and unhealthy than ever before, because they're so incredibly confused. And they have also built a very harmful relationship with food. In fact, their relationship with food is based on fear, worry, doubt, a lot of self-judgment. And so my perspective around diet today is I'm anti-diet. I've been anti-diet, and I've been teaching anti-diet for many, many years now, and even right before COVID. And so, what that actually means being anti diet is allowing ourselves to start to listen to the intuitive clues in the body. Now, of course, these days there's a lot of conversation around intuitive eating, and I want to make it super clear that when we intuitively eat, it doesn't mean that we have 12 donuts for dinner and then for breakfast we eat pile of pancakes and we're eating burgers and pizza for lunch. That's not intuitive eating, because if your body was to ask for what it needs, it is not going to ask for high fructose corn syrup, and it's
Right.
not going to ask for refined or processed food because it actually doesn't recognize these foods. But if we allow ourselves without the mind deciding for us, and the reason I say the mind is because all diets are not intuitive. It is an app that we're following. The macros have already been calculated. This app tells me how much I should eat. I'm not actually listening to my body. Then that's where we actually start to see a lot of the harm coming into place. But instead, if we actually listen to our bodies, the body's cues, you would know when you're hungry. You would know how much you need to eat. You would know what time that you would want to eat. And if you even allow for it, you would notice that you're actually craving more whole foods and real foods. And so I don't have any rules about food in terms of we should or should not eat this and that, but I think we can all agree that just in the span of the last 50 some years, the majority of our food is not really food. We don't actually really eat food anymore. We eat food like substance. And
Mm.
that is now the issue. A lot of our food is not recognized by the body. And when it's not recognized by the body, that's where now we're starting to see the manifestation in dis-ease. But if we were to want to find the best way to eat for us, we can maybe look back at what our grandparents ate and remember that we're meant to eat from the land because
Mm.
that's what our body recognizes. Now, do I eat cake? Yes, of course I eat cake. I want to say that I'm a fitness freak who eats cake because I'm never going to stop eating cake. However, I eat cake when I feel like eating cake. It's not because I'm having a cheat day or a cheat meal or a cheat treat or any of those words that diet industry has created. It's really because it was a birthday and I felt like having a piece of cake. And so that is the philosophy of being anti-diet, is creating a balance, but the balance is really chosen by your body. And there's not this obsession with food. There's not this over analysis that has to happen before we even say yes to eating a certain thing.
I love that. And it's so what you're really describing, I think you said it, we eat food that comes from the land. It's recognizable, right? Whether so if I'm hearing you right, it could be protein from an animal because that's a natural thing. It could be a vegetable from the ground. It could be a fruit. Those are all things. They don't come in boxes. They're not wrapped in packages because they're natural and real. And that my general philosophy, I've always been, I wouldn't have termed it anti-diet, but I am anti-diet, I guess. So I've never really followed a food program that had a name attached to it, right? And I think back in the early 2000, it was Atkins was a big thing, and it was mostly all my friends were eating like bacon around the clock, and I'm like, how can that be good? They just eat bacon. It just seems
Right.
like too one. And so I would just sort of be this. My dad always sort of taught this moderation, right? He's very fit, healthy. He's 87 years old, and he still exercises 5 days a week, um, and he would always just say moderation, right? So we don't eat too much of anything, but we don't also deprive our, if we like a little bit of ice cream, I have a little bit of ice cream. We just don't eat the tub, right? I don't eat a giant bowl. I would have like a little taste of something like that. But, and so, yeah, I tend to do a balance of, I like carbohydrates, right? As an endurance athlete, when
Right.
carbs were sort of this like demon to be demonized for a while, like, oh, you can't believe you eat carbohydrate. I'm like, aren't carbs energy? Doesn't that give you the fuel to be able to do things? And yeah, I mean, you don't want to just eat pasta all the time, but I mean, I'm Italian too. So I like bread. I like pasta, right? I got to have my carbs. So yeah. And I just like what you shared there around eat what our grandparents eat things that are natural, that are of the earth, and do it in a way that's smart. And then also don't torment yourself over if I want a piece of cake, I'm going to have it and I'm not going to have to wait for a cheat meal. And I love the power of words as well. And the idea of calling something a cheat meal makes it necessarily bad. We're going to jump to another topic I'm going to ask you about, this idea of sleeping with mouth tape, but I have discovered mouth tape and I sleep with mouth tape and I find it to be like transformative. Like it is truly, I've always been a good sleeper. At the same time with mouth tape, I found like my sleep is like next level good. But the tape I use is called Dream Tape. And I love that idea that it's called Dream Tape. There's other tape out there. One of them is called Hostage Tape. And I think, why would I want to put tape in my mouth that's called hostage tape? I'm not a hostage. I don't want to use that. I guess it's tongue in cheek. It's catchy and certainly it's memorable. But Yeah, I don't want those words attached to my sleep pattern, right? That I'm a hostage. But anyway, do you have any thoughts on mouth tape or anything like that? Encouragement.
I've just heard about it just 5 seconds ago. That's,
Wow, that's exciting. I'm exciting to share this with you. Yeah,
yeah.
so where this came from for me was I became aware of breath work a couple of years ago and the importance of breathing, nasal breathing, especially. So I try to nasal breathe all day long. And when I work out, I try to nasal breathe for as long as I can until I start to need more oxygen and have to breathe through my mouth. I recognize that it calms me down, right? So that parasympathetic engagement of my central nervous system by breathing through my sinuses and nasal breathing. And then I heard people talk about doing that at night. And I know I sleep well. I don't snore. My wife tells me I don't snore. But I do mouth breathe, right? So I wake up, my mouth's open, my mouth's very dry, all that nastiness. And I think, and as people would talk about the idea of taping your mouth shut so you're having to breathe through your nose, I thought, well, I know nasal breathing is good, but I really have no interest in taping my mouth shut until a couple of, well, one in particular, elite athlete that's a friend of mine, she used it and she said phenomenal results. So I thought, I'm going to try this. And I tried it and it was ridiculous. Like I
Yeah.
dreamt very vividly, which I usually don't dream much. I don't remember them, which indicates REM sleep. I didn't wake up so at all. It's even just to roll over. And so it was really, really good. But anyway, if you don't have any knowledge of it, you're not going to share anything, but I would tell you, check it out. I'll send
I'm
you a link after
totally
the
gonna
show
check it out now.
to the one. Yeah, it's definitely been really, really good for my sleep. And now I travel with mouth tape. So when I leave on a trip, I bring it with me and sleep with it that way. I'll tell you, it was very claustrophobic when I did it the first time. The idea of putting tape over your mouth and going to sleep, pretty weird, but it worked out. Okay,
Mm.
intermittent fasting. I'm thinking you probably have something. Yeah, talk about intermittent fasting. It's very all the rage. I don't know if you've seen like Dana White posted something he did, not an intermittent fast, but like a 84-hour fast and how great that was. And Tim Kennedy and some other people have talked about these long fasts. Do you have any
Yes.
thoughts on either or kind of the value and benefit of fasting?
Yeah, intermittent fasting. It's interesting that there's a term for it because this is something that we're naturally supposed to do. And I don't like to say we're supposed to and not supposed to. I don't want
Mm,
to use that language so much, but if you think about it, the way that we've evolved, we didn't always have access to food available for us at all times. So even when you think about, let's say, fruit, right now I live in Canada and it is January as we're recording, and I can go to the grocery store and I can get strawberries and blueberries. That's actually very unnatural when we think about that because that is going to be a summer fruit. And
mm,
how is it available all year long? So the fact that we have access to food all day long also has allowed us to consume food all day long. And just coming back to what you were saying about the nervous system, there is a certain time that the nervous system and the body needs to rest and digest and heal itself. But when we're always eating and we're always using up so much energy to digest food and to break down food, then we don't also have that capacity or that energy available to heal. And so by stopping to eat, and intermittent fasting, by the way, I want to just quickly insert here, it's not a diet, it's an eating pattern where you allow your body to rest at certain times, where you can upregulate certain things and benefits in the body, such as autophagy. Autophagy is a process where there are certain functions in the immune system that allow to remove debris or any sort of threat that is available in the body, but that can only happen when we are not digesting. And so, what I like to look at intermittent fasting as, it's actually a health protocol, first and foremost. The side effect of that is releasing weight if we have weight to release. And so, when we are intermittent fasting, we are allowing the body to focus on the immune system, to focus on the enzymes that need to be balanced, the hormones that need to be balanced, all the healing that needs to be balanced. And so when we allow for that, we also are allowing for optimization in overall health. And now the other thing that happens too when we're intermittent fasting is we're getting the body to rely on stored energy as fuel. Whereas when we're always continuously eating, the body is getting used to having carbohydrates or glucose as its primary fuel source, which is really great in certain conditions like endurance events, for example, where you're needing to refuel. However, we're actually adaptable. So we're metabolically flexible. We're adaptable to be able to use different types of energy sources when there is, for example, glycogen not available. So in the absence of glycogen, I should be able to fall on my fat stores as fuel. And again, this could also be very beneficial in endurance sports when we know how to balance the fuel. And so, all this to say is, Eric, I absolutely do believe in intermittent fasting. It is a very powerful protocol. And the most, let's say it this way, 12 hours would be the minimum window that we could actually see the benefit of intermittent fasting. So that's not challenging to do. That's 6 a.m. first meal, 6 p.m. last meal. We give ourselves 12 hours to rest, to heal, to digest any extra leftover nutrients that we've put in the body, allow the body to do that. And then we also start to see an improvement in sleep quality when we're doing intermittent fasting. We start to actually see an improvement in performance when we're doing intermittent fasting, simply again because we are alleviating a lot of that energy that the body was naturally using to digest all the time. And if you think about the way that many of us may have our eating habits, we wake up in the morning, we have breakfast, and then a few hours later we have a snack, and then we have lunch, and then we have snacks, and then we have dinner, and then we continue to eat almost up until the point where we go to bed, and then wonder why we're exhausted the next day, and maybe feeling bloated, maybe we're having some digestive issues, we didn't sleep really well, we woke up several times at night, we're needing maybe Tums to calm down any heartburn. And so when you think about all these things, all I'll say is give it a try. What would happen if we just turned off digestion for a short while? And that's kind of talking about intermittent fasting on a day-to-day basis. However, long fasts are also beneficial. I would personally say 72 hours would be maybe the max to go, depending, of course, on why you want to fast. There are many other reasons to fast longer than that. But if you're really looking for just a reset, especially a gut health reset, I would say 72 hours. Because after 72 hours, that's where we start to see a slowdown in metabolism. And this is all in the literature if anybody wanted to explore that. But also 72 hours is the amount of time that it would take the actual gut to regenerate itself. And so I do this a few times a year where I'll just take a break from food. I'll drink fluids the whole entire time for 72 hours, just allowing for maybe just a reset in the body, allowing for full healing. And it's really amazing because once we actually start to free up that energy from digestion, all of a sudden we have better ideas, we have more clarity, and we actually realize we don't need to always eat. We don't constantly need to eat to really get our energy from that place. We have this direct link in our mind that food equals energy. But you know, when you're in love, Eric, right? As soon as you meet someone you're in love, you're like, oh my God, I don't even need to eat. I'm high on life, right? All these exciting things happen and you have so much energy. So it's just that reminder that energy doesn't necessarily come from food. We could even be eating all day long, yet we are not in maybe a good headspace. Maybe we've got a lot of problems in our lives. We're so focused on our problems, and notice how fatigued you feel. So even though you've been eating all day and you're so focused on your problems, you're exhausted. So energy doesn't directly come from food. It actually comes from someplace else. And intermittent fasting helps us connect to that highest level of self where we're not thinking about just food and needing to constantly eat and even distract ourselves with food.
Yeah, super knowledgeable. I love that. The idea that we often are eating just for distraction, right? We're eating for mental entertainment, distraction, habit, convenience. It's there. If it's not there, we don't eat it. I do a few programs where we intentionally kind of food deprive the participants to show them really what their body's capable of and how they're able to still do heavy physical exertion without food or with just very small amount of caloric intake for a period of time. And it's eye-opening, right? It's aware like, man, I didn't realize how stupid I was eating. Like I was just eating junk and putting in food all day long, and I didn't need it. And I thought, oh, I need a snack or I need to have a power bar before I do this thing because no, you don't. You have plenty of calories in your body, right? So I love that. And do you do is it a daily, like, so do you prescribe more? I know you said 12 hours sort of minimum. Do you do more like an 18-hour, or what is your sort of go-to when you're doing, do you have a go-to when you're doing intermittent fasting?
So I really listen to my body. Right now it's 4:20 for me in Montreal. I haven't eaten yet today, and I feel comfortable. There will be other days where I had to eat at 11 because I'm starving, and it really will depend on what I'm doing.
Mm.
So I don't have a set time. Again, I don't like that rigidity. Diet culture teaches us to be so rigid, and it has
Yeah.
to be this way, and if it's not that way, that means you failed. But I just listen to whatever the body wants that day. So there, again, depending on my activity, I can actually go for a 10K run fasted, and I'll be totally fine until dinner time. On other days, I'll do my run, and then my body just needs to refuel right after. And so when we take a look at that, and again come back to intuitive eating, we're really connecting with what our body is needing in the moment, and it's not always the same. We're not a machine. So some days where if we have a lot of work to do, we're actually using a lot of glucose. That is the favorite energy source for the brain. So
Mm.
you might notice that you might be more hungry, or maybe you were very active that day, so maybe you're going to need more food, or maybe you were sitting at the computer all day and you didn't move much, so maybe you feel like your fast can go a little bit longer. So my minimum is always, I don't want to say 12 hours, but more like I want to stop eating a few hours before bed. For me, that's probably my sort of one ritual that I really want to commit to because it directly affects my sleep. So if I stop eating a few hours before bed, I know I'm going to get a better night's sleep, and then that's going to affect my day, the rest of the day. So it's when it comes to intermittent fasting and setting your window, it's going to be very, very different for each person, especially if they already have a disordered relationship with food. If there's a person who's prone to binge eating and they're recovered binge eating, or they have maybe a bit of feeling of out of control when it comes to food, then we don't want to get them to get to the point where they're so hungry, so famished, because that's just going to trigger a binge. And so something like 12 hours or stopping to eat a few hours before bed would be beneficial for them. Now, a person maybe who is diabetic, or a person who's got other conditions that they want to address, we could start to look at maybe a longer window. But what I'll always say when it comes to exercise, training, even eating, we don't really want the body to adapt to this one thing. We always actually want to keep it a little bit more in flow. And so when it comes to intermittent fasting, if you're noticing that you're always doing 18-6, 18-6, 18-6, and you're noticing that it was very beneficial at first, I would even recommend let's change up the window. Don't have the body get used to eating at a certain time. Comes back to that comment that you were saying about snacking. We've actually conditioned our body to think that we need to eat right before we train, or that we need to constantly snack all day. This is conditioning. It's like the Pavlov experiment, right? Just the body's just, we've programmed it for that. And so let's get away from the programming and get more into the body. So out of the mind and more into the body, and really listen to the cues. And then you'll always have an idea as to where that right window is for you that day.
Awesome. All right. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this question. If you have just a couple more minutes, because I tend to talk a lot about cold plunging on the show, and I have friends that tease me about that. But I love the cold plunge. It is sort of a stereotype now on social media. People are cold plunging all over, but I've loved it for quite a while. I read Wim Hof's book years ago, and sort of was intrigued by this whole idea of facing the cold. I'm not so much a fan. I think there's a place for his breathing technique, but I'm more of a low and slow and parasympathetic breather than a, upregulated breather like Wim is. At the same time, I love the mental challenge and how I feel coming out of the cold. It's very hard. It never gets easier. Cold showers, cold plunges, they don't get easier for me, but I just love them in terms of the anti-inflammatory, the feeling of accomplishment, the feeling of kind of restarting the heat engine and getting the body warm after you get out, all those things. You're in Montreal, plenty of opportunities to do cold plunges. What are your thoughts? Do you have any perspective on cold?
Yeah, it's incredibly beneficial for all of the things that you've just shared. I don't cold plunge myself. I do cold showers though. So I'll do this after I take my shower. I'll turn on the cold for a few minutes, and then I recite this Tony Robbins little thing that I always say every single time. But I'm out in the
What is
cold all
it?
the time. Yeah.
What's the thing that you say?
Oh no, you're gonna make me do it. Now I am the voice. I will lead, not follow. I will create, not destroy. And so I can keep going on, but we'll just come
Nice,
back to
nice. I love it. Appreciate that.
I'm gonna have to send that over to you later. But any mantras, right? And one of my favorite mantras, coming back to Tony Robbins, but one of my favorite mantras that I say to go outside in the cold is, "I'm comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'm comfortable with being uncomfortable." And I think that is that feeling of exhilaration that the cold gives us, right? That feeling of accomplishment.
Yeah.
I actually feel like, oh my goodness, that's life, that's vitality. And doing that cold shower just wakes you up. It just reminds you of how alive you are. And I think that's what's addictive. But I cycle outside in the snow. I run outside in the snow. Yeah, it's so fun. That's why you have to get out of Texas, Eric. Like
I
you
know,
gotta
man.
come to Montreal. That's like the one good thing we have going, right?
Right.
Um, but connecting with the cold, it's beautiful. It's allowing ourselves to really realize we're not gonna die. We're not gonna perish because
Yeah.
of these extreme circumstances, and it's incredibly empowering. But there's so many benefits, of course. Impact on the immune system, reduce inflammation, upregulate a lot of endorphins and other feel-good hormones in the body, and just really help with healing and just even mindset, just mental strength. And I think that's probably the most powerful thing that we get out of allowing ourselves to be curious enough and brave enough to endure something that the mind is telling us might be a bit harmful to us.
Yes. Love it. And agree. So super. Yeah. We're definitely singing the same song right there. That's one of my favorite things is the cold, as much as it is a challenge. All right. So what is next for you, Sherry? What are you excited about, and what's kind of on the horizon for you?
Oh, so good. So many really exciting things. I launched first and foremost a app on the App Store. It's called Hit Dex. And this actually was born out of all the things that we spoke about today, especially just learning to use your body and your own body weight to really be able to master your strength and your fitness. And then the other program that I'm also really excited about is called Make Peace with Food. We launched this just last September, and we help women overcome unwanted eating behavior, specifically emotional eating, stress eating, binge eating. And when we're in that place where we feel more control around food and more within our own integrity in terms of the choices that we make around food, that's where we now can start to make major lifestyle changes. And so I'll always say to anyone, if you're struggling with a disordered relationship with food that either stems from past traumas or even just a history of chronic dieting, we have to address this first before we can make changes, because any changes that we do going forward, the body starts to see as a threat. And ultimately, what we want to do is shift the nervous system from sympathetic nervous state to parasympathetic, where we can then start to habit stack and bring in all these powerful self-serving habits.
Awesome. Super exciting. Love that. Where can people connect with you and find your work and find the things that you're working on?
Well, you can go to Instagram. That's a great place at Sherry Shaban Fitness. All the resources are there. And then to maybe explore a little bit around how to overcome unwanted eating behavior, I have a free download also at makepeacewithfood.com. It is a little workbook. It's got some exercises and some self-reflection practices that we can do there to really start to release some of those unwanted eating behaviors.
Okay, fantastic. We'll get those things, those links put in the show notes for our listeners. And it's been a great conversation, Sherry. I've really enjoyed it. We went in a lot of directions. I appreciate you being willing to go in so many different places and so much knowledge that you shared with the audience. So thank you for your time and for the conversation.
Thank you so much, Eric. And you're so amazing at what you do. Thank you so much for allowing people to come to this place, this platform, to learn from you. It's so incredibly inspiring. Please keep doing it.
Absolutely. I definitely plan to, and I appreciate those kind words. To our audience, thank you for taking time from your busy day to listen to the show. Always humbled that you do that. If you could share the program with a friend, if you would write us a review, give us a rating, all those things help us reach a broader audience. Until next time, friends, I'm Eric Sardina. You've been listening to the Return to Authenticity podcast, and bye for now.